Hello, this is Rolfe of Mentoring Works. Welcome to Effective Feedback. And welcome if you are on the live broadcast today, and welcome if you are watching the recording. And can I just say that although a lot of the stats and research I'll quote in this session are based on managers and teams, every one of us can benefit by giving better feedback. At work, in your personal life, feedback is one of the most powerful communication tools we have, because effective feedback affirms and reinforces behaviour or encourages someone to think or do something differently. Positive feedback gives encouragement to people. It can build a person's sense of self-worth. It can foster a good relationship between you and them. But guess what? Corrective feedback is just as important. This is when you let someone know that what they are doing is not what you want. It can also be encouraging and build their self-worth and build the relationship. And in this webinar, that's what I really want to talk about, how both positive and corrective feedback can give that encouragement to the people around you that you are communicating with. But, you know, if you feel uncomfortable giving feedback, you're not alone. Mark Murphy of Leadership IQ sampled 30,000 managers and employees and found around 9 out of 10 managers have avoided giving constructive feedback to their employees for fear of the employees acting poorly or reacting poorly. And that might be why, according to Gallup, excuse me, 28% of employees say they receive feedback a few times a year, while 19% say they receive feedback once a year or less. And I wonder how you feel about that. Feel free at any time to type your comments in the chat box if you're on with us live today. And you can make your comments public there by putting a message that goes to everyone. Or if you want to share something a bit more sensitive, you can make the message just to me and I can read it out without nominate who that is coming from. Because I recognise sometimes there are sensitive comments coming through. And when people get feedback in the workplace, a lot of the time, it's in those annual or twice a year structured performance management systems, the tick and the flick type things that we call performance reviews. Now, I'm hoping that some of these have improved, but when this research was done, 14%, only 14% of employees strongly agreed that performance reviews inspired them to improve. So kind of on a bit of a mission here to improve that. Funnily enough, at the same time, only 14% of organisations were actually happy with the feedback that they were giving through those performance management systems. I'd like you to think about this. I saw this quote somewhere: traditional performance management puts off until tomorrow what can benefit employees and team today. So what do you think about that? What's the best feedback you either gave to someone or the best feedback you ever received, whether it was kind of one of those pat on the back, positive reinforcement types of feedback, or whether indeed it was some corrective feedback that allowed you to adjust and correct what you were doing. And thanks, Marilyn. She's giving some useful commentary here. So when it's someone you trust and who understands your area of expertise, feedback from someone who is only interested in keeping good with the system organisation is not just worthless but destructive. Yeah, that kind of tick and flick, the feedback you have to do. We are up to is that 48 participants? So clearly a very attractive proposition we've got here today, looking at how to make our feedback effective. Okay, so my aim in this webinar today is to make feedback easier, both to give and receive, and of course to make it more effective. So I'm going to talk about developing a constructive approach. That is an approach to feedback that serves you and those people that you want to give feedback to. I want to talk about the ratio between positive and corrective feedback and getting that ratio right, and also talk about giving feedback with the right kind of frequency. Hey, that's taking us up to 50 participants on the live webinar. I'm thrilled. I think that might be a record. So that tells me something about how important this topic is. So stay with me to the end, because I'm going to give you a download link to an ebook, a performance lifting team productivity checklist that you can download for yourself. So let's kick off the content of today. And you know that sports people rely on measures of performance and strive for their PB, that is their personal best, using it as motivation to win and sometimes to cope with loss. However, neuroscientists, so those people that have spent their careers studying the brain, the neurons, our reactions, from a mental and emotional and indeed a physical level, they tell us that feedback about performance can feel threatening. And I wonder how many of you relate to that, giving or receiving feedback and feeling kind of that apprehension or even that pain that you sometimes feel if you're receiving that corrective feedback. And this is a quote from David Rock, who's a leading academic in this area, and Beth Jones. And they say that feedback about performance in particular tends to activate the brain's primary threat network, which produces a feeling akin to physical pain. So this is, and I've talked about this often on these webinars, this is the idea of the fight, flight, freeze reaction that's kicked off in our brains, and once that's kicked up, our defenses turn on and our ability to communicate is much lowered. So it's something we really have to look at. So I'm going to give you 5 tips, if you like. So tips that will make a difference, our approach to giving and receiving feedback, so that we can reduce the fear and discomfort. And I'll pause for questions after I've gone through these 5 tips. So the first one is, make sure your feedback is having a future focus. So it's not about assessment. It's not about measuring people's performance, giving them a rating. When you give feedback, it's focusing on the future. We can't change the past, but you can alter present behaviour to improve the future. So we want to emphasize that in our approach to feedback. Someone said to me yesterday, in our motor vehicles, we have a big windscreen and smaller mirrors and rear windscreen, because most of our focus needs to be on where we're going, not where we've been. Sure, we need to see in our peripheral vision what's coming up behind us and what's behind us, but the majority of our focus needs to be on the future. And that's why this approach to feedback leads us to more effectiveness. It's interesting to know, in fact, I found it astonishing the first time I came across this work from the Gallup organisation. Only 50% of employees actually know what's expected of them in the workplace. So that's why tip number 2 is use feedback to actually establish expectations. And I'm going to actually, I'll pop that link in the chat box for a little bit later on, because I've got an ebook you can download called the Team Productivity Checklist. Now, this is a little bit away from the field of mentoring. It is, as the name suggests, about leading teams, but I think there's great value in it for you, and I'll give you that link a little bit later on. And I think you'll see that it contains a whole bunch of information there that I've drawn from various reliable sources. And in fact, I'm going to launch a poll in just a moment, because I want to explore just 5 of these aspects that are covered in the team productivity checklist now. So these are the must-haves for a productive team. So in terms of knowing what's expected of them, people need to have a clear and compelling purpose. So why are we here? What are we supposed to do? Why is that important? Understanding that we've got procedures and they're important, but also it's about outcomes. And that's as important as the process. You know, sometimes we might need to take a different way to get there. Another point covered in the ebook is we know what success looks like. We know what's expected of us, we get individual guidance, and we're taught what we need to know. We're given development, and our professional personal development is supported. So I think I've got about 10 or 12 points, but I just thought I'd touch on these 5 now because they relate to this idea of feedback, which is so important. So I'm going to launch a poll now, and I want you to reflect on yourself and in your own role. And I'll launch this poll for you that's got questions around these 5 areas. So would you say, so this is asking you the question now, and you can select all or none of these. In my work, I have a clear and compelling purpose. So you understand what your role is and why it's important. I know what success looks like. I can measure it. I can touch it. I can, I have feedback that tells me I am successful more or less. I know what's expected of me. I get individual guidance. I am taught what I need to know, and my development is supported. So, and this is totally anonymous. I will share the aggregate of the responses in just a moment. But individual responses, you're the only one who knows what they are. Okay, I'll just give you, about half of you have responded. There's a lot of boxes to tick there. So I'll just give you a few more seconds. While you're doing that, I might be able to, you should be able to select all options. Can everyone, no, just one. Oh, what happened there? So I made it multiple choice. Okay, that's going to be a bit difficult then. All right, so if you can only choose one, let's skip that then. I'm sorry, I've obviously made some sort of an error there, so we'll skip that. I wonder about my second poll. All right. I would suggest that what you do is, since we can't do it as a poll here and share the answers, just take a screenshot if you can, or maybe jot those 5 points down. I'm going to actually pop in the chat box now and I'll send that to everyone. If you want to copy that link and do the download a little bit later, that's for the team productivity checklist. So I was going to run another poll, but I might just, if I've made the mistake on one, I've obviously made it on the other one as well, and I do apologise for that. It was the same questions. My thought was that I would simply ask you, if you lead a team, what would your team members' answer to these questions be? Do they have a clear and compelling purpose? But I'll leave it to you to download the book later on and work through that. And if you are leading a team, then I think you'll find that more useful in this context. You can ask yourself those questions. I'll continue on. So I think this is number 3 in terms of the tips on your approach to leading, your approach to giving feedback. And that is to use it as a reflection for learning. And we've talked so many times on these webinars about how important reflection is to learning. And one of the most useful things I ever learned was actually from a project manager in the field of construction. And he was renowned for bringing in his projects on time and under budget. And if you have anything to do with project management in construction, you will know that that is rare indeed. His main tool was the project debrief, and he explained it to me like this. He would conduct a team meeting. Now, he had trained his staff to view this meeting as a non-threatening review. This was after they had celebrated the project being completed, and this was a separate learning and reflection meeting. So what it meant was a room full of, your butcher's paper or your electronic whiteboards or whatever resources you have. And indeed, these days, we'd probably be able to do that online quite effectively and even anonymously, which will make it even better, I feel, less threatening. Because what it is a conversation about what went well and what did not. Now, it is essential that there is no praise and no blame in this review. It is strictly looking at the facts and the opinions so that you can reflect and learn, so that indeed you can replicate what went well in future projects and put in protocols to avoid what went wrong in future projects as well. So from conversations with teams, and you can then get down to using feedback to individualize goals, because team feedback can be very powerful. It can be inclusive and it can be motivating. It needs to be complemented, however, with individualized goals. It's a natural flow on from that. So you've got team goals that are shared, and each individual has their role. They'll have different levels of development, different strengths, and you'll need to have individual conversations with them. And when I say individual conversations, please know I am not talking about these performance review systems that might be imposed upon people in the organisation. I'm talking about regular conversations that you have with the team around you. So I also think that you need, in being able to give effective feedback, you need to also have an approach to it in yourself. When you prepare what you're going to say, you practice your communication techniques, you have patience both with yourself and with people you want to give feedback to. You are persistent. Don't expect to say something once to anyone and have them retain it and act on it. You often need to persist and repeat your feedback process with them. Make sure you are fully able to point out positives. Don't reserve feedback for when things go wrong. I'm going to talk a lot about that as we go through this webinar today. But have your eyes open for positive things you can remark upon in everyday life. And that will make it easier when you do have to give corrective feedback. So just going to look for your questions, your comments, your observations. Now, if you want to make a comment before I go on with the rest of the webinar, I've been talking about developing a constructive approach to feedback. If you joined late, the recording of this webinar will be up. I can't promise today, but certainly in the next few days, you'll be able to find that. And next week, I'll be sending out a newsletter that has a link to it. So talking about a constructive approach to feedback, and now I'm going to start to talk about getting that ratio, which I briefly alluded to then, between positive and corrective feedback. And Susie is asking, can you recommend how to move a manager away from emotions to more objective goals? Well, I feel like there's a place for emotions, and there is a formula in assertive communication. If you do a little search, you're going to find what's called I language under the banner of assertive communication. And this is when you frame your feedback in a sentence that goes something like, when you do X, I feel, and then you state briefly, succinctly, in as non-threatening a way and as you can, you own your own emotions, you own your own feelings. And if a manager or anyone can do that, then I think it's okay to share some of the emotion. I'll give you another formula that sticks more to, as Susie asks here, the more objective goals. I'll give you a formula a little bit later on for doing that. Okay, a good question from Marilyn. What's a good way of giving corrective feedback that is not perceived as threatening? Well, the first thing I would say is get people used to receiving feedback that is positive. Okay, I'm not saying butter them up. I'm not saying give unwarranted compliments or inauthentic or ingenuous positive feedback. Yes, and Louise, thanks for jumping in there. She's giving the more the more objective, non-emotional version of that formula there. When you do X, the impact on me or the team is Y. Thank you for that, Louise. But as I was saying, get people used to receiving feedback, positive feedback. And that makes it easier then when you need to give corrective feedback. A lot of it comes down to your non-verbal communication. That is the tone of voice, the phrasing that you use, and the words that you choose as well. You're coming across in a helpful, I mean, there's a scale, and you'll see later, this is not about letting people get away with behaviours they should not. And there is a very important time when you need to stand in your authority and give people direction in terms of the feedback, and that kind of correction. But leading up to that, you can be, should I say, more gentle. I'm not saying you need to be a wimp here. I'm saying there's a scale here, and you need to train people to receive feedback and do it in small steps. Okay, let's move on. And so this is an important point. And there have been decades of research that say we need to get the ratio of positive feedback and corrective feedback in the right balance. And I'm not saying 50-50 here, far from it. Now, when I'm talking about positive feedback, I'm talking about engendering positive emotions in people, such as hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, interest, awe, gratitude, serenity, joy, and love, even, as opposed to some of the emotions. And these are, I feel, all too familiar to us over the last few years that we've experienced, that fear, anger, sorrow, alarm, even panic, that sometimes lead us to indifferent, even contempt, shame, guilt, and remorse. Now, I don't think there's anyone who would not have experienced a heightened sense of some of those negative emotions. And it means that we've got to work even harder to develop these positive emotions that we all need for individual and team productivity. And in fact, at the most basic level of not just surviving, but thriving, we need 3 times the positivity as negativity in our lives. So if we're feeling some of these negative emotions, and who wouldn't, we need to find ways to also feel and to up the level of the positive emotions that we're feeling. The research suggests effective teams have found ways to up those positive emotions to 5 to 1, 5 positive to 1 negative. So you can see that there's a lot of work there to be done. And the tipping point is 3 to 1, where we move into positivity, that feeling of thriving. Teams probably to flourish need around 5 to 1, and in fact it can get up to 15 to 1 before it becomes too much. And I know I have colleagues in juvenile justice here in New South Wales who've done a lot of work in this area, introducing this to people who are responsible for young people in custody, and trying to up the interactions that have positivity as at their core, to make the lives of juvenile people in custody better. Now, what if I told you, you might be sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, how on earth am I going to do this? Well, what if I told you there was actually a simple way to raise positivity in your workplace that has been shown to improve performance on a range of measures? Let me just mute this. Okay. So this case study comes from Ochsner Health Services in the US. They had, at the time, 11,000 employees, and they educated all their leaders, the physicians and their nurses and support staff, to implement what they called the 10-5 way. And they got bottom line results. They increased their number of unique patient visits, which you can see is a business measure for a health organisation. They increase the number of patients likely to recommend their services, their medical practice provider scores. So what is this magical 10-5 way? Well, and this comes, so you can see the reference down the bottom there. Obviously, this is pre-COVID, but it'd be interesting to find some more recent research on this. But it's a way of providing social support to work colleagues and patients. Tell me what you think about it. Because social support has been linked to positive physical and emotional outcomes, employee engagement and productivity. It's really simple. If you walk within 10 feet, someone help me out, what's that in meters? 10 feet, I think it's probably about 3 meters of another person, you make eye contact and smile. If you're within 5 meters of another person, you say hello. 5 feet, I'm sorry, 5 feet. That's a bit under 2 meters, so a bit over a meter away. Say hello to them. Now, if you start walking around doing 10-5 all by yourself, or even with your team, it might feel a bit silly and forced in the beginning, but building the habit has personal benefits as well. As well as those business ones. You know, eye contact, smiling and greeting is the most basic form of recognition and the most basic form of feedback, because it says, I see you, I respect you, I care, you're a human being. So I wonder, if there's actually things you do in your workplace to increase the positivity ratio for other people, or what do you find increases your positivity in the workplace? So there are things that you do for yourself, or other people do for you, or the organization does for you. Do you want to type those in that increase the positivity? Love to know what they are. I'm going to keep moving so we don't so much run over time here. And I've got a kitten who's come to visit me, so I hope she doesn't walk on the keyboard. So picture a little sailboat here, and because what we know is most people, and this is a visual metaphor for you, because most people in the workplace are not getting enough positive feedback. I was a consultant for over 30 years, and people used to tell me they got seagull management. Do you know what that is? It's where the managers fly in, poop all over you, and fly out again. Hopefully that's not what happens where you are. But I used to get comments like, they're quick to tell us when something is wrong, but rarely tell us when we're doing things right. And that's my point. We need positive feedback and corrective feedback. And I would say that we need 3 times as much positive feedback as corrective feedback. Okay, so Ratnesh is saying, yeah, they have team building events. Amy is saying a weekly huddle where we share working client wins and share bouquets for recognition of others. That is a lovely, can I repeat that? Thank you, Amy. So a weekly huddle where we share working or client wins and share bouquets for recognition of other team members. That is the loveliest idea, isn't it? That must give you such a lift. Ratnesh is saying weekly coffee catch-ups for the team, and Helen's sharing, my team has a couple of short meetings each week to check in and communicate. All staff attend at least one each week. The team feels connected and supported despite being physically separated. We also share a weekly win via Teams channel. Louise is saying, remember something about a person that they previously told you and ask how that's going for them. Lovely. Lovely. So back to my sailboat. I'd love you to just draw this little picture. It's a sailboat with 2 sails in the front. Actually, I'd draw one. When I used to do this on a whiteboard or something, I'd draw a big spinnaker out the front. Now, so if you were to draw sort of 3 arrows that represent the wind, so draw 3 arrows that represent the wind in your boat's sails. That's positive feedback. That keeps people going. Now, what happens when the wind stops? Well, the boat will drift aimlessly. It will be at the mercy of the currents, and people are the same. If you don't give positive feedback, if you don't tell them things are right, praise them for a good job, they may not know. And even your best people may start to drift off course without the validation and support that keeps them on track. But wait, there's something missing from this picture. Can you see what it is? Look at that. It's just a little model boat, but there's something important that's missing. Yeah, the rudder. So if you've drawn this picture, make sure you draw the rudder at the back of the boat. On a small boat, someone sits near the back to steer a course with the tiller attached to the rudder. If it's a bigger boat, you've got a steering wheel nearer the middle. For our purpose, the rudder represents corrective feedback. So I want to make that point again. We need positive feedback and corrective feedback given in a positive way if we are to flourish and grow. So there are 3 types of feedback, and these will help you improve people's performance. So I wrote that with a workplace mindset. But you can, as I said in the beginning, you can apply this to working with colleagues, working with friends, even with family and neighbours. If you want to get something different and better from other people, then here are 3 ways, 3 types of feedback you can use. You can use affirming feedback. This is letting people know you want them to keep doing this. You'd like them, you appreciate this, you want them to keep doing. Correcting or corrective feedback, you want them to do something differently. And then you can do reviewing, where you know that we can all do better together. This isn't down to the individual. This is usually a collective approach where we're going to collaborate. This is like the manager's review feedback process. So just want to say something about praise. So I do suggest that you look for every opportunity to give affirming feedback. This is sometimes called praise. In behavioral psychology, this is called positive reinforcement, because it is that I like this and I'd like you to keep doing this, positive reinforcement. And it ranges from that eye contact that we talked about in the 10-5 way, the smile, saying thank you. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Letting people know that you appreciate them, nodding or making a short comment that lets the person know you're listening, giving them a compliment where it's warranted. It must be genuine. And of course, giving praise and recognition for good work, effort, and achievements. So it's not only that this sort of praise increases positivity ratio, it also helps build trust and rapport and a workplace culture where people feel respected and valued. As well as reinforcing desirable behaviours, praise increases endorphins in the brain. That's the feel-good hormone. It increases oxytocin. That's a bonding hormone. And it reduces the stress hormones. Sounds like a good recipe for better relationships to me. Now, as I said briefly earlier, this does not, being willing to give praise and positive feedback and affirming feedback doesn't mean we ignore below standard performance or bad behaviour. Indeed, we have a duty to stamp out harassment and bullying in our workplaces. If we are in a senior or a management role, we definitely have that responsibility. If you're not in a position of responsibility, then you have responsibility to yourself to choose your battles. However, the absence of feedback, including consequences, allows people to get away with unacceptable behaviour. People don't know that you care and don't get called out on bad behaviour. Why would they bother changing? And I love this quote from David Morrison, where he was the chief of the army. He gave a very powerful speech about bullying and misogyny in the armed services. And he said, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So he was saying to people, he said very clearly, and he was the chief of the army, these are our standards. If you can't adhere to these standards, he literally said, get out. And then he said to other people, if you are allowing these standards, you are accepting them, and that is not acceptable. So, effective feedback. Here's a formula for you. Get ready to take a screenshot or be quick with your note taking here. So this is the how-to of giving effective feedback. It's a formula that affirms and reinforces behavior or encourages someone to do something differently. And as someone in our chat was able to share earlier, sometimes we don't want to get too emotional about this. We want to stick to the facts. So you state what the person is doing in specific behavioural terms. Now, if you're giving praise, this means that, again, when you did such and such, rather than saying, oh, great job on the report, you go a step further. You give them some more factual feedback. Great job on the report. I particularly liked that you put plenty of diagrams that made the text really come to life and made the facts easy to take in, for example. So state the facts. This works with corrective feedback as well, as you'll see. State the impact. I think, was it Wendy who said the impact on me? So state the impact of that person's actions on the work, the team, you. Now, again, if this is a personal and you have emotions, and if you want to own those emotions and let the person know how you feel, you own them by saying, I feel. When you do X, I feel Y. Or you can stick strictly to the objectives and the goals and state how that behavior or that action has repercussions in the work that they're doing. Then you can go on and give the praise. If it's positive behavior, provide them with that recognition and praise. And if it's negative behavior that you want them to change, you may need to provide alternative behavior that you'd like to see next time. You'd say something like, well, next time I'd like you to, or what I prefer to see is this. So we're going into instruction. Now, I've added something, another step to this before you go into instruction. So after impact, you can go to praise, but I would advise an extra step before you go into instructing them on alternatives, and that is to ask questions, because you may not know. There may be some facts that you don't know. And I've got an example here, and this was told to me by a supervisor who wanted to change the behaviour of an apprentice who was consistently late for work. It was not only annoying, but getting to the stage where the apprentice might have been sacked if he couldn't become more punctual. So the supervisor, first of all, stated the fact, you've been late 3 times this week. Then he described the impact. If this continues, you're in danger of losing your job. It's important that this information is conveyed not as a threat. The supervisor wanted to change the behavior, not get rid of the employee or punish him. He wanted the apprentice to listen. He wanted to solve the problem. So think about the tone of voice. Think about if you're there face to face, what's the body language saying? He wanted to be positive and mentor the person. So next, the supervisor asks questions that invite problem solving. So the supervisor, he said, you've been late 3 times this week. If it continues, you're in danger of losing your job. So I'm wondering what the problem is and why you're having such a hard time getting to work. Now, that's not criticizing him. That's I'm on your side. I want to solve this. I'm wondering why you're having such a hard time. Now, cut a long story short, it might seem very silly to you and me, but the young person simply didn't wake up early enough. He set an alarm on his phone, but often, barely awake, would turn it off and fall asleep again. The supervisor asked the apprentice to come up with ways to overcome that. And they discussed things like moving the phone out of reach, so he had to get up, set a second or a third alarm, or go old school with an alarm clock. And together they agreed the solution, an alternative that would work for both of them. And then, importantly, the supervisor closely monitored the situation and reinforced the apprentice's punctuality in the following days. Now, sometimes people are unable or unwilling to negotiate a different approach. In that case, you will have to instruct them and explain what you want them to start doing, not just what you need them to stop, because they need to have an alternative behaviour from what they're doing now. Does that make sense? Okay. So just very quickly, make sure when you're giving feedback, you give it as soon as practicable. The closer the feedback is to the behaviour, the more effective the feedback will be. Make sure your feedback is sincere. So this is particularly with positive feedback. Be looking for good things to comment upon. And remember, feedback can be as simple as a nod, a smile, a thank you, a hello as you walk in. When you're giving positive feedback, and indeed corrective feedback, be specific as possible. So give actual examples. What is it they are doing? Talk about the benefit, or on the other side of the coin, the consequences, the impact of the behavior. Shape your feedback to the person, use your knowledge of the person. Don't go over the top. Some people like certificates and, employee of the year or week or whatever. A lot of people hate that and see it as totally insincere. So you need to shape your feedback to the person. And very importantly, share appropriately. So if you're giving either praise or constructive feedback, sometimes it's often best to do it privately rather than in public, because some people get very embarrassed by praise, and you will humiliate people if you give them corrective feedback in public. So don't do that. Okay, so very quickly, affirming feedback keeps them doing what you want them to do. Corrective feedback is something that you want them to do differently, helping them get on course. And reviewing is a collaborative approach where you both work together to get a better result. And yes, I'm getting some feedback here from one of the participants who's saying it is a reality that few employees do not accept feedback, even when we have given it constructively. It is the character of the staff member sometimes. Yes, some people are quite resistant to feedback. They are either, they've built this hard shell, their mind is closed, they're not in a learning mindset at all. And then if you are their manager, you may need to move into performance management mode, which is a whole other level of feedback. However, I think if you look for it and try some of the techniques, there may be ways to improve performance of someone who doesn't readily accept feedback. Or you could just sit them down and have a conversation. And again, eye language. I don't seem to be getting through to you with the feedback I'm trying to give you. I am wanting to assist you to improve your behavior. Can you tell me what it is you need? These are the standards. Make it a learning thing. Here is the performance standard. Here is your performance. How do you suggest we close that gap? Put the onus on them, perhaps. Okay, just a few words about a collaborative review. This is one where you look at the real situation and the ideal. As I said, here is the performance standard. This is what we're going for. This is the goal. Here is what's happening at the moment. Here's the reality. So we look at what needs to change in order to get there. We draw on past experience, things that have actually worked for us in the past. We look at a variety of options, perhaps brainstorming some ideas, and you can do this one-to-one, you can do this as a team if it's appropriate, and then we plan our action, make an action plan to work us towards that. Okay, just looking for any questions or comments coming in. Okay. So in this last little bit, so we've talked about your approach to feedback, talked very extensively, and I think it's the most important section, getting the ratio of positive and corrective feedback right. Now let's talk a little bit about frequency. And some of you have mentioned that you have weekly get-togethers or people check in. And Gallup research has found that employees are most engaged when they meet with managers weekly and feedback is on the agenda. So it becomes normalized as part of what we naturally talk about in various ways. You want to help the team set priorities and ask them what support they need from you. This is you being open and receiving feedback too. So make sure you model constructive ways of taking feedback on board for yourself. They've also found that, this is from the Gallup research, being open to discuss non-work topics is important. Now, switching back to mentoring, this makes life easier. Most of us open our mentoring conversations with a little bit of personal or small talk to, re-establish our rapport before we get onto our agenda. And people need to know you take a personal interest in them and they want to know that you care. Younger people want more feedback, connecting with them daily with a quick text, email, or drop by. And this is a word someone used before, checking in, not checking up on them. It really needs to be established that this is just the normal way we go about things. We check in on each other, see how you're going, not checking up on you. Yeah, I've got a participant saying sometimes I'm thinking that I have to give first a simple training on feedback so that everyone will be aware of its importance. I could not agree more. We need to understand how important feedback is. Okay. And some of you will have seen my comments before on what I call mentoring moments. They're conversations that just create insight. It's those times you take the opportunity to have a conversation that maybe explores options or provides guidance while you're doing something else. They happen in the workplace, at home, during leisure activities, and are simply an extension of normal conversation. How many of you have been kind of driving kids to school or sitting on the train or the bus with a colleague, or preparing the vegetables for dinner with a family member? And it's those conversations that can often provide an opportunity to have a mentoring moment. So again, it's when you notice and acknowledge something that they've done, a positive. You encourage their self-reflection. How did that feel when you got that so right? Again, it's a check-in, not a check-up. And it's an opportunity to offer support if people need it. And sometimes, if necessary, it's a way to guide and correct. So the last thing I'd like to say here is make sure you give yourself feedback. Most people these days have a to-do list. And if you're anything like me, you never come to the end of a to-do list. As fast as you cross things off, you you find more things to go on. I've been known to write things I've done and cry just so I have the thrill of crossing them off. But give yourself review time at the end of the day to review your to-do list. And okay, if you didn't get it all done, you, like probably everyone else in the world, setting too high expectations. But if what you did get done was the most important things, then congratulate yourself. Set up systems that measure for yourself. You don't have to share it, but this is a way of encouraging yourself to keep doing the right things. It's that affirmation that you need, and perhaps some correction as well. Perhaps you say, oh, I wasted a lot of time on this that wasn't important. Tomorrow, I'm going to make sure I'm focusing my best time on the things that are important. So celebrate your own success. So a daily review and reflect, maybe weekly achievements. Some of you are sharing those, monthly goals, progress, 90-day projects perhaps, and even an annual review of what you achieved over the year, which is easier if you've done it weekly or monthly. Okay, so we have, and we are concluding now, just sorry, I've run a minute over time. We've talked about developing a constructive approach to feedback, getting the ratio of positive and corrective feedback right, and giving feedback with the right frequency. So I'd love it if you're going to stick around, if you're on the live webinar, if you want to share what were your key takeaways, what are the actions. Quick reminder, we've got actually 2 more webinars. We've got motivation coming up, and then I'm slipping in an extra webinar run by my friends at Mentors City. I'll send you information about that. Today, the content has come from my book, Advanced Mentoring Skills, and I will stick around on the live webinar for any questions and comments that come in, and I am going to stop the recording now. So if you are watching the recording, thank you. You can email me to get the team productivity checklist, and I will see you next time on the webinar. Thank you. Stick around if